Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and this does seem a little bit different and I'm going to explain why. Today, we're going to be going over all of the possible matchups that could have happened in 2024 against incumbent President Biden based on my election model and what it shows for each candidate from the Republican primary. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to drop a comment down below if you like content like this. And so, pretty much, I have my original election model, which currently Donald Trump leads by 2 points in the RCP aggregate. Biden's down minus 16.2. This I kept the same, throughout all the models since this is Biden's, incumbent approval rating. We also have the demographics pool as well, which I did change depending on the matchup because different candidates are going to get different shares of different demographics. So this does change, and I'm going to be going over exactly why I have it a certain way. Donald Trump is ahead of Joe Biden by like around 2.9% in favorability. And I believe he's actually the only candidate that's ahead in favorability of Joe Biden, which is something interesting to take note of. And so essentially, what you have here is he's winning Arizona by 9, he's winning Georgia by 11. Like, Trump has the Electoral College landslide victory, as you can see right here. Donald Trump, I project, would get 347 Electoral College votes to Joe Biden's 191, which is something that not a lot of people are forecasting. You can go and watch my channel to see my analysis on this. I will probably be doing an updated video on the newest data from all of the states and everything, and I'm going to be showing a new projection possibly tonight. But what I'm going to be doing is going over different candidates to see how they fared off, and essentially I'm going to be going ranked from highest victory for the Republican to the worst defeat for the Republican. So the first person is actually going to be Pence, or actually no, it is not. It's actually going to be Vivek. Vivek is the next in line. This is the forecasted matchup that I got between Vivek and Joe Biden. Vivek would actually beat Joe Biden and get 313 electoral college votes to Joe Biden's 225. What's interesting to note here is that Vivek only leads the aggregate by 0.7. But what's interesting is that he's technically down in favorability, 14 points on 538. If we actually go to Vivek Ramaswamy, he's actually down at just 24% favorability, and Biden is at around, we'll see right now, he's at around 39%. So that is something interesting to take account of. If he was sitting at around 52%, the election would effectively be over. Like, you could basically test this out. I mean, if Biden was up by 6 and you did the math, it's close here, but the problem is that this would have to change. And you see Arizona is already really close. You see Georgia is pretty competitive. Nebraska second flips. Michigan is tilt. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are lean states, but the second I would change, the thing, because if Biden had 52% to 24, that essentially be like a minus 25 margin, and essentially the election would be over. you know at that point, effectively, the election would essentially be over because Biden would be winning Pennsylvania at that point, alongside Michigan and Arizona and Georgia as well, which would be enough to defeat him in the Electoral College. He still holds on to Wisconsin and Nevada very narrowly, so he does get a certain victory in the Electoral College. However, unfortunately, at that point, he would be losing. I have Vivek doing decently well with young voters. That's essentially why I kind of have the map like this. This is essentially why you get the results you get, even though he is down 14 points in favorability, according to 538 on Biden, and that's with Biden being below 40%. Vivek does lead the aggregate. If he was not leading the aggregate, this would be a far worse matchup for him. And so since he was leading the latest polls, which there was only about 3 or 4 polls, but it did show an aggregate lead of 0.7 with Vivek, you do see that unfold. And it would have been really interesting to get this matchup. We wouldn't have gotten the possible landslide with Trump, especially since Trump is the former president. You guys got to understand, too, with Trump, it's a little bit different because there is no incumbency advantage for Biden or Trump because they were both the president of the United States. So it actually helps whoever technically did a better job, which polling indicates that Donald Trump did. It's going to supercharge their boost. So theoretically, Trump is actually the one who has the incumbency boost this cycle, not necessarily Joe Biden in a way. However, in all the other matchups, it is not running against a former president, and so that is why you do see Vivek do slightly worse than Trump. However, he still does very well. He wins the Rust Belt very easily, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. This is only because, Joe Biden is deeply unpopular. If Biden had the same popularity as before, it would not be going so well. Iowa, Ohio, likely victories. He wins Wisconsin by about 4, Pennsylvania by about 3, Michigan by like 2.5, Georgia by like 4.5, Arizona 2.7, Nevada like 4.5 as well. So you have very similar victories in some of these Sunbelt states. New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia get, competitive. I have him doing really well with young voters and college educated voters. I mean, he doesn't win those groups, but he does exceptionally well with them, even better than like Donald Trump, for example. That's why I have him winning all of the swing states from 2020, essentially. However, he doesn't do well enough with white voters to win places like Minnesota, New Mexico, Virginia, or New Hampshire, or even a state like Maine at large, for example. The next matchup we have is actually Pence. And what's quite interesting is that Pence actually beats Biden. It's really close. It's a really close election. It literally comes down to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. Arizona could go either way, but essentially, this is the map that I got. It's kind of similar electorate to 2020, except places like Illinois, New Jersey are kind of trending to the right, including a place like New Mexico, Minnesota, and New Hampshire kind of trending to the left. This result, we can actually go to the Vivek one. I'm actually curious to see. So Vivek would win the popular vote by about 1 point, essentially. With Pence, it's a little bit different. With Pence, Biden's actually winning the popular vote by around 2.5 points. That's essentially what you get for that matchup. And this is what the Electoral College would essentially look like. Pence would barely pick off Georgia, barely get Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada. Again, deeply because of Biden's, very bad popularity measures. Like if Biden was just as popular as he was in 2020, Pence would be losing this very easily. He'd probably even lose North Carolina at that point because, again, like most of these candidates, he's actually down quite significantly in favorability compared to him. Now it's less than Vivek, but the problem is the demographics don't look as great for Pence because I don't necessarily have him doing as good with young voters or African American and Hispanic voters. So even though he does slightly improve from Trump's metrics in 2020, it's not enough for him to get like a big victory, even something like Vivek in the Electoral College. But Pence basically here, this election would have been a toss up. It could have gone either way, but essentially Pence barely beats Joe Biden in this matchup. The next one is Ron DeSantis, and this was, one that people were really excited for. People were really anticipating this, and what's actually quite interesting is that the demographics for him look really bad because he doesn't necessarily improve with African American, Hispanic voters enough to offset like the female and the college educated vote, which I think would really hurt him this cycle. Like the demographic pool has him losing Pennsylvania by like 3. He even loses North Carolina in the demographics pool, which is very interesting. So the demographics for him really don't look great at all. But because the polling averages the previous results and trends in every single state, and the fact that he's not super down in favorability, he does narrowly eke out Wisconsin by a point. He does do better with senior voters, so that could explain a victory in Wisconsin. He wins Texas by 6.6, so he does a point better than Trump. Barely pulls out Pennsylvania. He gets the state of Nevada, and he's able to barely lose Georgia. Now, funny enough, in this scenario, he actually performs better in Arizona than most of these other candidates. He actually does a little bit better in Arizona than Georgia. That's because he is improving with Hispanics way more than African American voters. That's why you see him lose a place like Georgia fairly easily, actually. So he barely does eke out the election. He gets 270 electoral votes to 268. The popular vote here would have been plus 2.7. So essentially, if Biden is winning the popular vote by over 3 percentage points, that basically almost means that Biden probably ends up winning re-election. And so we have two more matchups to go over. It is the Haley matchup. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people don't really know about favorability numbers. Favorability numbers are actually a very popular way to kind of track where a candidate would necessarily be at. Now, Biden. What's funny about Haley is that Haley necessarily isn't super down in favorability or is not necessarily super down in terms of the aggregate because she actually leads the aggregate by 4.4. The problem for her is the demographics. That is the big problem. She would really struggle with, she would do a little bit better with female voters, but other than that, she's really struggling with other groups. She actually loses South Carolina in the demographic pool. I don't have her doing well with African Americans. She literally does like a point or two better. And with Hispanics, she does like a point or two better. But white voters regress. Non college educated voters really don't turn out for her. And essentially, you would see a bad defeat for her in the Electoral College. She does worse in Georgia than in Arizona, which would make sense. She does a little bit better than Trump in Florida in 2020, but that's not really something that really makes sense because the state is effectively trending to the right. So that's not really great either. She actually loses the popular vote by 5.7 percentage points. So that is the projected margin. She would get 66 million. Biden actually gets around 74 million votes. Texas is only like a 3 point victory for her. Ohio is around a 6.9 percentage point win. Nevada's 2.1. So she does improve from Trump's performance there technically, but does worse in North Carolina, does worse in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania gets like 1.4 percentage points more Democrat than the previous cycle. You have Nebraska second. The thing is that district was redistricted quite a while back, and so that does actually affect the margin here. So since it did get redistricted and the elasticity models kind of in place, you do see it kind of tracking that. So even though she's losing the popular vote by 5.7, it's not that bad of a defeat here. We can see in Michigan, she's losing that by about 4. She wins Maine second by 9. Though these districts are very trending in opposite directions. Essentially, she only wins Iowa by 7, Kansas by 10. Indiana actually goes down to a likely margin of victory. So if we were to actually pull this up on an electoral map, this is essentially what you get for the electoral college. Joe Biden actually wins 319 electoral college votes to Haley's 219. I would expect RFK to start taking some votes from both candidates, and I actually think he would hurt both of them equally, probably even start hurting Nikki Haley a little bit more. And so this is the matchup that I would get. Joe Biden actually wins re-election in this scenario, so that is quite interesting to see. And the final matchup I have on here is Chris Christie. Now, Chris actually led the aggregate by 0.5%. However, he is down in favorability compared to Biden by 17 percentage points. He is astronomically down. He's literally at 22%. Like, that's horrendous. That's like really bad. And so because of that, because he barely leads the aggregate, and the demographic pool for him is extremely bad. He only wins Idaho by like a point. He loses Arkansas by a point. He loses Alabama in the demographic pool by 4. He's doing really bad in some of these states. He literally only wins North Dakota by 3. Basically the entire Trump base would do worse. Biden would actually improve with most demographics. So that's why you see a really bad defeat here for him. Like literally Wisconsin is a 30-point victory for Biden on the demographic pool. Like it's a really bad demographics map for him. And when you come over here and look at the final results, he literally wins Indiana by 3. He wins Louisiana by 3.5. In this scenario, I would essentially expect RFK to probably get around 20% of the national popular vote. Like RFK would get quite a bit of a national popular vote. Arizona is literally safe in this scenario. Colorado's a 27-point victory. Mississippi's a 2-point win. Missouri won. Montana won. Nebraska's first is really competitive alongside the at-large vote as well. The second district is literally a safe Democrat stronghold. Now Texas is almost a 10-point victory for Biden. Literally, Christie would be getting like 58 million votes, and Joe Biden would actually improve and get like around 83 million. However, I do expect that RFK would be taking some of these votes away. Wyoming would only be a 29-point victory. West Virginia, 24-point win. You'd have Tennessee at an 8-point victory, Utah at around 7.5. South Carolina would be a 2-point loss. We'd have Ohio as like a likely loss. So this is what the Electoral College would look like if Joe Biden went against Chris Christie. You would essentially have Joe Biden getting over 400 electoral votes, and Chris Christie literally gets like 107. This is mainly because RFK would probably be taking a lot of the Trump base. I actually think this is the only candidate that Trump would not endorse in the presidential race alongside Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley may be a little bit different. He may try to go out there and be like, okay, well, I might try to help her out, but she will still lose. And then people would blame Trump for her loss. It would be this whole thing. even though it would really just be her fault. But Chris Christie, like Trump would literally like not even endorse Chris. He'd probably, I think Trump in this scenario would either just not endorse anybody or he would legit just endorse RFK. And RFK would literally get like 15-20% of the national popular vote. That's why you see a map like so bad. So in this scenario, third party turnout would be really high, but it would mostly be hurting Chris Christie in this scenario, not necessarily Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, I think, would get a lot of his base back. I think there would be a lot of people that would have voted for Trump that would stick with Biden in a case with Chris Christie. And the same thing goes for Nikki Haley. I've actually mentioned before that I would probably vote third party in this scenario. I would literally not vote for Nikki Haley at all. And that would explain why the Florida margin would get close. All these candidates would not bring enthusiasm. Neither of these two. DeSantis, not really the most enthusiasm, but he would still be a really unpopular president by a narrow margin. Mike Pence having the vice presidency, even though he's gotten way less popular than before, you do see him still do fairly well with some of these groups. And then you have, Vivek doing fairly well, winning 313. And then you have my current projection for Trump, which is the landslide victory. And you notice that Trump is the only, the only candidate that would win in a landslide fashion as of right now. So those are all of the possible matchups that I have constructed from my model showing, from most Republican result all the way from the most Democrat result with Biden literally winning like 400 and something electoral college votes. Like it would be something straight out of like 1912. Like it would be a bad electoral college defeat for Chris Christie. He even loses Alaska and Maine second. He even loses Maine second in this scenario. And Nebraska at large is actually like super competitive. And even South Dakota is a likely margin. It's only like a 9-point victory for Christie. So this is a super bad map for him. But either way, guys, if you guys did enjoy this analysis for all these possible 2024 matchups, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And I will see you guys very, very soon.